Hello, my name is Dhruva Jaishankar and I'm a fellow for foreign policy here at Brookings India. We are in an interesting time in India-Russia relations. Prime Minister Modi and President Vladimir Putin have met recently in Sochi, in the Russian town of Sochi, for what was billed as an informal summit. And they will be meeting at least 5 times this year, either on the sidelines of major summit meetings at the G20 Shanghai Cooperation Organization and the BRICS Summit, and in a scheduled bilateral summit meeting taking place later this year. And so this is a very interesting time to look at the changes in India-Russia relationships and how it's affecting not just bilateral ties, but also India's relations with China, the US, Afghanistan, and other countries. And so with me today we have Vice President and Senior Fellow at the Observer Research Foundation, Nandan Unnikrishnan, to talk about India-Russia bilateral relations. First of all, in all of the summitry that's taking place between President Putin and Prime Minister Modi, what is the context behind this? Are we seeing some kind of course correction in 2018 in India's approach to Russia, or is it more significant than that, or is it perhaps less significant than many people are making it out to be?
Well, I'll start by firstly thanking you, Dhruva, for inviting me to Brookings. And now to deal with the question as it were. No, I think it's a reflection of the testing times the world as a whole is going through. There is a great element of uncertainty in the world because we all agree that the unipolar moment is over, but we don't really know what has arrived. And therefore, since there is this uncertainty, I think all great powers, and India is one of those great powers, are attempting to hedge and prepare for all possibilities. So one is, I don't think it's a course correction. I really don't believe that we had developed our relationship with the United States to the extent that we had become an ally. These things take time. It also has to take a much longer time to develop that level of trust. Secondly, I sincerely believe that India is a great power, so it's not really going to be anybody's ally. It's not going to accept anyone else as a suzerain upon it. So, given that, I don't think there's a course correction that took place. But yes, a perception had to be addressed. And in this specific case in Russia, there was a growing perception that India was growing close to the United States, and this could be detrimental to the relationship with Russia. So that is basically what I think the leaderships are trying to address at this point of time.
What do you think the big outcome from the Sochi informal summit was?
Well, one of the reasons it's informal is because you get to discuss many issues that otherwise should not, or normally practice does not allow you to bring up in a formal summit, as it were. So I think there are stresses and strains in the relationship which need to be addressed. It's not only the Russian concern about the relationship with the United States and India, but it's even India's concern about the relationship Russia has with, let's say, China or Pakistan for that matter, or Russia's views on Afghanistan. So, it's a whole gamut of issues which the two leaders have addressed, and to my understanding, if you read the press as well as the statement they issued, they may not have arrived at a consensus on every single issue, but some of the hiccups, as it were, have been removed. Some of the wrinkles have been ironed out.
Moving to Afghanistan specifically, what are some of the differences in the Indian and Russian approaches to the evolving situation in Afghanistan?
Well, one is, I think it's very clear. Till very recently, we were all more or less on the same page, right? Of course, there was a certain element of distance the Russians would want to keep from the Americans, but essentially the understanding was that the Americans are shedding blood and treasure, fighting our war, trying to keep that place stable and under control. Today, the problem that I can see, but this is my personal view, is that into the multiple layers that exist in Afghanistan, the Russians have added one more, and that is their global rivalry with the United States. So that additional prism is beginning to color the way they see the processes which should lead to a particular outcome. On the outcome, everyone is agreed, but it's these processes that are beginning to create problems, identifying processes that are acceptable to all. And I think on this, and correctly so, India is in some ways closer to the United States, and therefore some divergences with the Russians have come up. But again, my fundamental belief is, and I've spoken recently to some Russians in Moscow, the differences are not insurmountable.
Beyond, the big, in some ways, the big defining characteristic of India-Russia bilateral relation has been the defense agreement, defense trade between the two. Russia remains India's largest defense supplier, external defense supplier, and India remains the largest market, I think, for Russian defense equipment. But beyond that, what does the rest of the bilateral agenda look like on the economic front? Are we seeing an increase in investment trade, or is there more room to grow in those areas?
No, I think this has been a lament of the past 20 years. Everyone has lamented that the economic relationship is not commensurate with its potential. That's the standard cliche that has been used. But yes, I must say that over the past 2 years, there appears to be some movement. For a long time, we just talked about the fact that Russia is an energy producer and we are an energy consumer. But just this year, we've started getting the first LNG, a long-term contract. The first supplies have come now. We're supposed to get, I think, 2.5 million tons of LNG every year. The Russian company Rosneft and a couple of others have invested in the SR refinery. It's the single largest foreign investment in India. It's close to $13 billion. So that has occurred. We've also invested in the energy sector over the past 2 years in Russia. So there is a growing cooperation in that area. The economic relationship, it's also looking up the latest figures I just looked up before I came to talk to you, sees about a 10% growth in just the first 6 months of this year, and there was a 20% growth last year. So obviously something is changing. One will need to go into these figures in greater detail to try and understand what actual problems are there. The final thing is, once you actualize or operationalize the land route via Iran, then I think trade will pick up also, because there will be a shorter and faster way of delivering goods.
And this is the International North-South Transportation Corridor.
That's right. And
what is the time frame for that becoming operationalized?
Well, essentially there is a small 80-kilometer rail line that has to be built between Azerbaijan and Iran. Now the Azeris have said that they will do it themselves. They're not looking for participation from the Iranians. So I think that should take a couple of years. But in the meantime, there are alternate routes which allow you to use the North-South corridor. So my thing is that don't go for nomenclatures. Start utilizing whatever it is. And if there is commercial backing and commercial viability, these problems will sort themselves out.
And finally, all of this trajectory that you've outlined, in some ways, the discussion at the senior levels between the leaders, perhaps a growing energy relationship, will this to some degree put India at odds with not just the United States but also Western Europe, which there has been a hardening in some ways of relations with Russia following a number of incidents in the last year or two? Where does India position itself in this?
Well, one is we have always maintained that the relationship, a hostile relationship between Russia and West, and United States included, is not in India's interest. That is point number one. Point number two, there was a time when Indo-Soviet relations were the most important relationship in India's foreign policy. Today in our foreign policy calculus, Russia is not number one, neither is it even number two, and I suspect it's not even number three. So therefore, I don't think in that sense people should really worry about the interactions between India and Russia impeding India's natural movement for improving relations with the West. The third and final point is that I'm not obsessed about this, but just to address it, since it is the dragon in the room, as it were. Russia's relationship, Soviet Union's relationship with India, took off at a time when we had difficulties with China. I'm talking of the late 50s or the 60s, right? Similarly, Russia had difficulties with China. Subsequently, till the breakup of the Soviet Union, Russia was really our balancer vis-a-vis China. Particularly after 71, when Nixon opened up the relationship with China. It is subsequent to that, and particularly 2014 after the Ukraine incident, when the Russia-China relationship started growing closer. And you may describe it as tactical, whatever, but the point is they are closer with each other, and they both have a common enemy, which is the United States. That is when we naturally feel that we have to be closer to those who can help us deal with the issue. I'm not talking of containing, but deal with the issue of China's rise, and to ensure that China does not emerge as a hegemon on the Eurasian supercontinent.
Right. Thank you very much. Those were really great and concise answers. Thank you very much, and looking forward to hearing more from you.
Glad you invited me. Thank you.